Thank you for joining us for our 9th virtual reading. We can't wait to see you in person, but until then, we love seeing you on Zoom. So thank you for being here. Let me also thank my Murphy Writing colleagues, Stephanie Coley and Taylor Coyle, who are the heroes of this and our other online activities. Tonight, we are privileged to host two of our Stockton colleagues, Nancy Reddy and Emily Van Duyne, and our longtime friend and Winter Getaway faculty member, James Richardson. Our featured readers next week will be 3 additional Stockton colleagues, Emily August, Cynthia R.U. King, and Jacob Camacho. Before we get started, I'd like to congratulate on behalf of the Murphy Writing team, the 2,000 undergraduate and 350 graduate students who received their diplomas today from Stockton University. They should have gotten them at Convention Hall, but instead, like most things these days, they got them over Zoom. But we're especially proud of 4 incredibly smart and creative women who served as Murphy Writing interns over the last 4 years. So I'd like to give a shout out and a virtual hug to Marissa Luca, Alexa Maternin, Shiloh Previty, and Michelle Servillan. Thank you. And thank you also for those of you who contributed to our Pass the Hat Fund. Due to your generosity, we're able to post daily writing prompts, continue our Murphy Writing Wednesday and Monday and Wednesday write-ins, and these virtual reading series. We'll be able to do this at least till the end of June. We couldn't do these programs without your help. And if you have missed any of our other readings or would like to re-experience them, go to the Murphy Writing YouTube page. Stephanie will post the link in the chat box so you can bookmark it. All right, so that's what we'll be doing. Now, during tonight's reading, you can comment if you like by going to the reactions button at the bottom of your page and either putting a clap your hand or a thumbs up, or doing it traditional way. We can do that as well. I'm not going to read the bios of our writers. You can find them on our website and on our YouTube page. So I don't want to take time away from the reading. One more announcement. The online memoir and poetry workshops that we're going to be offering in June have filled. There's a waiting list you can add yourself to, but we do have plenty of room in our Unsure Thing writing getaway. I like that unsure. It's usually the sure thing, but what's sure these days? And that's going to be held on Saturday, May 23rd. Again, go to murphywriting.com and find out more about it. Okay, so let us now welcome Nancy Reddy, Emily Van Duyne, and James Richardson.
Is that my intro, Peter? All right, great. Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you all. I was just a little distracted by clicking through to see everybody because it's so nice to see the faces of so many people that I don't live with. It's amazing. One of the things that I've been thinking about that I've realized that I miss a lot in this kind of strange world we're in now is a kind of casual web of connections that we're all caught up in, like the people that I see when I drop my kids off at school, the people that I see kind of around town, colleagues that I see in the hallways at school that I don't really know, those kinds of things. And so I thought I would start in a slightly odd place with a poem that thinks a little bit about that. This is a poem that predates our world now, but thinks in particular about the dads and then the kind of kinds of dads that I've seen at daycare in my many years of moving children back and forth. Taxonomy of dads. Dads in cargo shorts in 40 degrees. Business casual dad. Dad in college sweatshirt. Grumpy minivan dad. Sensitive baby wearing dad. Secret tattoo dad. Dad who touches all the moms on their backs or elbows in a slightly too familiar fashion. Dad of girl and princess outfit. Newly feminist dad of daughters. Feminist dad who at a meeting says, "Great idea," to the male colleague who repeats from beneath a beard what a female colleague just said. CrossFit dad. Bearded dad in dogfish head hoodie. Dads named John, dads named Jeffrey, not Jeff. Dads whose wives have been all touched out for years. Dads in loafers with jeans. Dads who don't mentally reallocate all the daycare dollars, all the hours spent in doctor's offices and soccer fields and back to school night, to vacations in places with exotic names. Dad who does. So I live, the funny thing, of course, about this being on the internet is that I could be anywhere, but I live in New Jersey, which is still, after 5 years, kind of surprising to me somehow. And I was thinking about how little that place has still kind of entered my writing, that I feel like it's still, my brain is in some ways a lot slower than my body, I guess. And so as I was thinking about this reading, I was thinking about my first year in New Jersey, when I lived in Ventnor near Atlantic City, and my younger son, who's turning 5 on Monday, was a baby, and he was sick like all the time, like constant ear infections, and it was really just, it was difficult. And there was one time where he was really sick, and I had to take him to the ER, and I drove along Atlantic on Absecon Island, and the Best Children's Hospital in Atlantic County shares a parking lot and a parking deck with Caesars. And so I was like going to the pediatric ER at the same time as I was going to the casino, and I was kind of like, what am I doing with my life? And so I read a poem that thinks a little bit about that. The universe has a temperature. In New Jersey, in the middle of last century, scientists pointed a telescope to the blank night sky and found heat peering back at them. The combined heat of the universe, all the heat left over from the Big Bang, spread evenly across space. It's 2.725 Kelvin. In this century, it's Monday morning in Atlantic City, and I'm driving my baby to the ER. He's been above 100 since he woke, his breathing slow and labored, dozing hot and heavy across my chest, too sick to cry. We're driving down Pacific, ocean and boardwalk on our right, vacant storefronts and check-cashing shops and fried chicken joints along the left, to the pediatric ER that shares a parking lot with Caesars. Our bodies are proof of nothing special. We each carry the 5 most common elements inside us, and each of those elements were born inside the earliest stars, so hot and dense they made new life. So I'm really happy, and I know that I know a lot of you from the Getaway, and so I'm really happy to be reading with Murphy Writers, because going to the Getaway has been such a wonderful part of my writing life in the last couple of years. And there's something people haven't been really like incredibly magical about. You get a prompt in the morning, and then everyone goes out and writes for a couple of hours, and by lunchtime you have to turn in a poem. And there's something about the energy of like everyone in this space all writing together that's really amazing. And so I wanted to read, I think, 2 of the poems that I've written across different years of the Getaway, because it's been such a gift to have that time. And so this first one is about, or partially about, the science fiction, I think we call it science fiction, movie, The Thing. The Thing. In the year I'm trying to be born, Kurt Russell takes a flamethrower to his friends, because they become monsters in the shapes of men. Something buried in the tundra 100,000 years heats up, and so the movie starts in ice and ends in burning. 2 survivors drinking around a fire while camp burns down behind them. When the year opens, Margaret Thatcher's son disappears in the Sahara and reappears 3 days later. The first computer virus travels via floppy disk. In Utah, a retired dentist receives the first permanent artificial heart and lives into the new year. It's the year my father leaves to hike a New Hampshire mountain and ski down the ungroomed ravine. There's a war and then another war. And photos from the time my mother's hair is short and dark. In another photo, I sleep against my father's chest as he sleeps on the couch. The thing is, there are no pictures of the 3 of us together, which is how I know my father carries, even then, his leaving. When the camera finally catches them, when the camera leaves them, we can't say for sure which man's the monster in the snow. But we know that they won't live for long. Russell's face is framed by a fur-lined coat, tendrils of snot frozen in his mustache, when he says, "I know I'm me," and we can choose if we believe him or we don't. We lived then in the small brick ranch perched on a hill above the steakhouse with a life-size plaster Holstein standing on its roof. Even in those earliest months, I slept alone, belly down on a crib stacked with hand-stitched quilts, the headlights of passing cars streaking across the bedtime walls. And I'll read one more getaway poem. The End of Limbo. In the Divine Comedy, purgatory was a pastoral, a grove of meadows, streams, and castles. Those who repented late had the farthest to climb, but could still hope. I am sitting in this hotel room. This is true. I was in the hotel at the Getaway at the Seaview. I am sitting in this hotel room below a sign that promises to guide me to the exit, that promises your safety in an emergency. The sign says, in case of fire, do not panic. Do not use the elevators. In medieval art, the damned raise their arms through flames to call for blessings from the Virgin Mary and her infant son, just one drop of water to cool the burning. Long before my birth, the worst thing happened. The first baby my grandmother gave birth to died, days old, for no reason. The baby had been named, but not yet baptized. So where could her soul go when her newborn body went into the ground? But that mother didn't die, didn't turn her back on God. She went on each morning making eggs and bacon for a husband who rarely spoke between the bites of buttered toast. She scrubbed the floors and learned to make a roast. She gave birth to 3 more daughters, and the last of them gave birth to me and named me for the daughter who'd been lost first. And all that time, where was that still and always baby? The church of my childhood taught that all the unbaptized went to limbo, where they could repent, make penance, and wait patiently until they too could be forgiven. The church of my childhood taught that every sin could be washed clean, except the sin of loss of faith. When the Lord stopped speaking to me, I didn't miss him for a long time. I was busy grading papers and falling in love and going to yoga. When I sit at my sister's table and hold hands for the blessing, I am not moved. There is still, I suppose, the specific theological question of heaven and who gets in and where to find it. Following the logic of a law-abiding God, St. Augustine saw those babies sent to hell, but granted one slight mercy. They suffered only the mildest condemnation. St. Thomas Aquinas believed unbaptized babies would never see heaven, but also that they wouldn't know to miss it. When the errorless church changed the law on purgatory, it was presented as not mistake, but revelation, and offered serious liturgical and theological grounds for hope, that all the blameless held in purgatory through no fault of their own might be whooshed through after all. My grandmother never spoke her first daughter's name, except when calling me. The ghosts of all those women gather above me as I kiss my own babies, sleeping safe inside their beds. The afterlife of mothers tending loved bodies in the dark. So when I was in, I think the first, and I'll read just one more poem. I After the first semester of my MFA, I met with my advisor, Ron Wallace, who was really lovely and generous. And I had printed out like everything I'd written that semester, and I'd been writing a lot because I was so excited. And I met with him in his office, and he had made these like really careful pencil notes on everything. And he was very lovely and generous in his feedback. But the first thing he said is he kind of like passed the work across the table to me, was, "Not much funny here." I was like, oh, it's true, which stung me, and I was a little like taken aback. But it was useful because it did make me think, like, what else can poems do? What are the other moves? What are the other kinds of tones that we want to do? And so that's something that I've been thinking about or thought about as I was finishing the manuscript I finished most recently, which is obviously in lots of ways pretty dark, but I did think like, oh, this is going to need some joy in it. And I had to kind of go look for that, which was good for me, I think, as a writer and as a person. So I'll read one more poem that tries to lean into that joy. Naming the World. When he's past a year, then 18 months, and still not speaking, we begin to teach the baby signs, scooping the air in front of us for want, circling a fist over our hearts for please. It's more he uses most, gathering the fingers on each hand together, then touching the fingertips over and over and over. He did it like this. At meals we ask, more cheese or more turkey? More banana or more cracker? Holding each item in the air so he can learn to choose, trying to tie the sounds of words to the objects that he wants. The signs go general, and in excitement he signs more and more water in the bath, more blocks, more milk, more dancing. Without a word to stitch it to, the signs sometimes hard to parse. Sometimes it seems it's just a baby way of saying joy. More dogs, more snow, more plastic T-Rex stomping over train tracks. Sitting on the floor with the new baby kicking at my ribs, this wondrous, not quite baby smiling at his trains. Baby, yes, more of this, more of all of it. Thank you.
I think is it safe for me to talk now? Give me a second, because that made me cry. So thank you so much, Nancy, for that beautiful reading and for your beautiful poems. So I teach with Nancy, and I teach with Emery and Steph Colley and lots of people that I can see here. And it's just amazing to me how good it is to see your faces. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to read an excerpt from the preface of the book that I'm working on, which is called Loving Sylvia Plath. I've never shared any of this really with anyone except for my editor, so I'm a little bit nervous, but also excited. And so the book is kind of 70-30, 70% about Plath and 30% kind of a memoir of my experience of growing up and coming of age as a Sylvia Plath superfan. And so I have Peter Murphy to thank for that, because he introduced me to Plath's work my freshman year at Atlantic City High School in 1994. He gave me the bell jar, and then he gave me her poems and her biographies and literary criticism about her. And so it changed the whole course of my life, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So thank you, Peter. Okay, so this is an excerpt from the preface. And so here we go. Women have long been the keepers of the horrific. Think of the Rilke poem where the woman washes the dead stranger, dropping the vinegar sponge into his fixed mouth. Women are the bearers of the stillborn, the miscarriage. They are murdered less than men, but murdered mostly by men, and too often by the men who claim to love them most. Fathers, brothers, lovers, husbands. Eros and Thanatos, for women, are too often tied into a sticky, inextricable knot. My own history, like that of so many women, is fraught with violence at the hands of men who claim to love me. It is also fraught with mysterious dead girls. When I was 20 and she was 21, a childhood friend, Alicia, died alone in her family's finished basement, which also served as her bedroom. I don't think her death was intentional, but I can never say for sure, because we never learned the truth of its circumstances. Her death became an event that had silenced her, and therefore earned its own pronouns. Like Sylvia, there was a love affair gone wrong, and her own resulting despair. I was left then with the sense, as we are too often led to believe in Sylvia Plath's case, that love had killed her. Love went off the rails and collided with her youth and beauty, Eros into Thanatos in one dread turn. I remember her face in her coffin, bloated and gray. I remember that her younger sister, barely 15, insisted on going alone to the funeral home to style her sister's hair and do her makeup a final time. At 26, another childhood friend, Jennifer, died suddenly. Her boyfriend came back to their Staten Island apartment from work to find her dead in their bed. Somehow, or so I was told, the family refused an autopsy. Another beautiful young woman gone. No explanation, no sense. Her mother began a foundation in her name to support aspiring young artists, and so for years, I watched teenagers accept scholarships to attend writing conferences or art school. I was moved by this, and then another close friend who teaches high school locally told me that Jen had become something of a legend among her artsy students, her beauty and talent and sudden strange absence from the world blending to fix her in their minds as a Sylvia Plath-like figure. The kids are sure, my teacher friend says, that she killed herself. I draw back, horrified, and open my mouth to object. But what do I know, really, about her death? Nothing, so I can say nothing back. In the Netflix adaptation of Shirley Jackson's novel, The Haunting of Hill House, we watch as young twins, Nell and Luke, are grimly haunted by a series of hellish ghosts. When they try to tell their parents what they see, they are disbelieved, but no one can talk them out of their haunting. They know what they see is real. They know, even as they grow into adults, that one day it could return and kill them, which ends up happening. Nell, like the character from Jackson's novel for whom she is named, dies when the ghost that haunted her as a child returns. Adult Luke is damaged, addicted to heroin, estranged from his family, but alive and able to tell the world what he saw and survived. Eventually, he sobers up. Eventually, he is even believed by the skeptics among his family. And Nell? As a child, she calls her specter the bent neck lady. We see her in shadow, a fall of spiky hair, some gray blue skin, a woman-shaped ghost with a gruesome bent neck, bent to broken. Only young Nell can see her face. It's not until the final scenes of Nell's adult life that the bent neck lady's identity is revealed. In a stunning single shot, we see that the bent neck lady is Nell herself as an adult. This image transforms to grown Nell climbing over the balcony railing at Hill House where she has returned. She is trying to escape, but becomes tangled in a rope her father left hanging there when he fled the house decades earlier. The rope, predictably, catches around her neck. She slips, falls, and dies. Her death is ruled a suicide. She has spent the day calling each member of her family, a literal cry for help, but no one responds. If most supernatural horror is in effect a way to describe unspeakable trauma, then it stands to reason that more often than not, the trace of that unspeakable trauma remains. It cannot be fully recast as ghosts. In this way, while in the straight narrative of the show, Luke and Nell are not the victims of anything but ghosts, their parents' responses and subsequent actions are the textbook responses of adults who can't face the possibility that their children have experienced or witnessed a trauma, be it childhood sexual abuse or physical violence at the hands of family or friends. Nell can't have seen what she saw according to her parents' logic. She must have been sleeping, dreaming, sleepwalking, or in a suspended state. Not, as she actually was, fully cognizant and aware and describing her experience in perfect detail. And although we, as viewers, are led to believe that, in the end, things resolve, as in the family who disbelieved Luke and Nell's hauntings come around to their way of thinking and are as whole as they can ever be, having lost their sister to a gruesome death. Is anything really better? When yet another woman is hunted by a danger so keen she dies of it, what story do we tell ourselves about it so that we can move on? It was a house that killed her. The devil made her do it. Nell also dies by her own hand in Shirley Jackson's novel. As the book ends, she is forced from Hill House by people she believed were her friends. She drives into a tree on the property as the group she had gathered at the house with watches from a distance. Her last thought is, "Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why don't they stop me?" I finished the Hill House series in the midst of quarantine, having reread the book the week I was visiting the Ted Hughes archive. It was just November 2019, but already that seems like another world now, one when I could travel freely on an airplane, slip anonymously into libraries and coffee shops and readings with poets I love. I was arrested by the image of Nell. I was arrested by the image of Nell, dying the death she knew in her last moments she had been watching happen her whole life. All my mysterious dead girls, I thought, thinking of Alicia and Jennifer, of my great Aunt Grace, who died half a century before I was born. Tuberculosis, we were told, but it never added up. I thought I should write about this, imagined a standalone essay, until I remembered that Sylvia is the most mysterious dead girl of all. We think we know her story because we learned about her death before we ever learned about her life. Those of us who know almost nothing about her know one sure thing. She killed herself by placing her head in an oven and turning on the gas. Jonathan Bate, the prominent literary scholar and Plath's husband Ted Hughes' most recent biographer, wrote of Plath, "The tragedy of Plath's death at the age of 30 is so overwhelming and the vilification of her husband so toxic that almost everyone reads the life backwards." Hughes did so himself. In Birthday Letters, his poetic narrative of their relationship, even the poems about the blissful early days are shadowed with dark foreboding, end quote. Whether or not Hughes was in truth vilified and how toxic that vilification may or may not have been will be duly treated later in this narrative. What I find notable about this quote is the accurate characterization of how thoroughly we have misread Plath. Before we ever open her books, we understand that her end is her beginning, a macabre, upended game of life. "Start here," the dead girl whispers to us. The words are a key that tumbles alongside a skittering spider from her mouth. We look the other way, not from horror, but because we've been instructed not to get too close, by Hughes, the man in black, who watches us from the corner. Even in Birthday Letters, as Bate notes, Plath, portrayed at the various stages of their love affair and marriage, which lasted about 6.5 years before they split up, is hurtling toward a prearranged date with death. In one poem from the collection, Sati, Hughes writes that Plath's suicide was conceived in the myth of your first death. For the entirety of their time together, according to the logic of this poem, Plath is trying to give birth to her eventual suicide. This event for Hughes is predestined. He can't try to stop it. So instead, he works with Plath to give birth to it. "The waters broke," he writes, as he glimpses Plath's labor cries. "Then, our newborn was your own self in flames." This idea that Plath's death was inevitable is one Hughes either really believed or told himself to absolve himself of all responsibility. Regardless, it goes close in hand with another faulty concept he worked to fix in the public's mind about Plath, that for 6 years she labored in mental agony to give birth to her aerial poems, and that when she finally did, they rushed out all at once and killed her. Everything about Plath's life and work for Hughes is tied up in her eventual death. Can it be any wonder then, since he had total control of her work and image for 35 years, that we use Plath's death as a cipher to approach her life? Sati is an important poem in helping to understand how thoroughly we misunderstand Plath's legacy. For alongside the idea that Plath was always hurtling toward death is another one that began early on in Plath's fame and is with us still, that Hughes was a martyr, despite the fact that it was Sylvia Plath who died. The word sati refers to an antiquated practice in India, wherein a widow throws herself on her husband's funeral pyre and dies alongside him. In other words, in Hughes's poetic version of events, he died first. This is consistent historically with one of the stranger things he said at Sylvia Plath's funeral. Gillian Becker, Plath's good friend and the woman whose home she sought refuge in during the last weekend of her life, wrote in her short memoir, Giving Up, The Last Days of Sylvia Plath, that as they sat at a pub after the burial, Hughes repeated, "It was either her or me." It is also consistent with the startling line from a letter Plath wrote July 20th, 1962, to her one-time therapist turned confidant. Dr. Ruth Boycher. He says now he dimly thought this would either kill me or make me, and I think it might make me, and him too. Hughes reads here like Shakespeare's Romeo confronting Tybalt after he murders his best friend, Mercutio. Either thou or I or both must go with him, he yells, cosmically aware that at least one more person is going to die that day. But while Hughes was obsessed with Shakespeare, and while the love story of Plath and Hughes has often been written up in the deadly high-stakes style of Romeo and Juliet, what is strange here is Hughes's idea that somehow Plath is a threat to him. In 1962, at the age of 32, Ted Hughes was already the most famous poet in England. Plath was not. She was a well-respected writer in her own right, but fame for her would come posthumously. If Hughes wanted to go off and have affairs, why not grant Plath the divorce she so clearly wanted? After all, as he told Becker that cold February day when Plath was buried in Heptonstall, West Yorkshire, in the Hughes family churchyard, everybody hated her. I didn't, Becker replied. What was Ted Hughes so afraid of? Loving Sylvia Plath explores this question in detail. When I started this book, I thought it was mostly about Sylvia Plath and partly about my obsession with Plath, something I hoped would shed light on others' obsessions with her. After all, I'm not unique. Millions of people have read Plath and gone on this same journey. It's a journey I've noticed that has no destination. Each time you think you figured something out, something else reveals itself. My understanding of my identification with Plath was, I thought, simple. Plath wanted to be a writer and get out of her shitty little town. I wanted the same. We both had endless ambition and a dark side. But it wasn't until I left a violent relationship, one where a man tried first to kill me and then to rewrite the facts of my life, that I realized there might be more to it than that. Before I lived through that, I thought I knew everything about Sylvia Plath. But experience taught me I had just scratched the surface. The ancient Greeks defined pathos broadly as suffering, experience, and emotion. They understood it as a crucial method of persuading one's audience. Too often, women scholars and writers on Plath have been chided, if not openly mocked, for identifying as closely with her as they did. Hughes's response to this was often to write of Plath as though she was an alien, dropped into the world from a cold, far-off star, inhumanly great, but inhuman nonetheless, and therefore not possible to, not worth, identifying with. Joyce Carol Oates picked up this strain of criticism when, in her now famous essay, The Death Throes of Romanticism, she wrote that Plath did not like other people because she did not essentially believe that they existed. She knew intellectually that they existed, of course, since they had the power to injure her, but she did not believe they existed in the way she did, as pulsating, breathing, suffering individuals. Even her own children are objects of her perception, there for the restless scrutiny of her image-making mind, and not there as human beings with the potentiality that would someday take them beyond their immediate dependency upon her, which she sometimes enjoys and sometimes dreads. To identify with Sylvia Plath, according to some of the best literary minds of the day, was to identify with a monster. This book rejects that openly. It understands that Plath loved and suffered as all of us love and suffer. It places her into the context of the world she lived in and our own. It is, after all, no surprise that I did not immediately identify Plath with Shirley Jackson's great novel and its ensuing adaptation. Forced onto her cold, alien planet, Plath, for so long, has no context. In truth, she was Jackson's contemporary, living and writing in her Beacon Hill apartment in Boston in 1959, the year Jackson published The Haunting of Hill House. It takes only a nudge to think of Plath in this way, yet for decades, those of us who did were frequently relegated to the sidelines, if not silenced outright. I write this book with the embodied knowledge of what it means to come right up to the edge of losing it all, because I loved a psychopath, someone who claimed to love me back. I'm writing it out of love for Sylvia Plath, for myself, for anyone whose life story was once balanced precariously in the hands of someone hostile to them. I'm writing with the kind of love Plath described in her great poem, Tulips, and I am aware of my heart. It opens and closes its bowl of red blooms out of sheer love of me. I'm flooded with pathos. I've leaned into it. In 2002, about a year and a half after my friend Alicia died, I dreamt of her. In the dream, I kept vigil by her body, then watched in frozen horror as she tried to speak. The stitching holding her lips together ripped, and she said in a voice not hers, "Mummy, someone sewed my lips together and I can't speak." Our dream lives are occasionally smarter than we are. Note, for instance, how my dead friend said the oh-so-British mummy, not mommy, which as Americans, she and I grew up saying. At the time of this dream, I was working fiercely on a long-form paper on Plath, who died in England, but who is also, in our cultural memory, a kind of mummy. Forever 30 years old, preserved for posterity at the moment of death. Ted Hughes cut out her heart. This book is a scramble to find it. Thank you.
Is it me? Emily, that was great. I think I've known Emily like 20 years, probably first on the dance floor at the Getaway, and she gets smarter every year. Just, I don't know. I'm going to start with a tiny dedicatory poems. It's just 4 lines. The Touch, for Connie. 40 years on, the wine we poured out on the lawn, leaving the party together, reaches the ocean. This is a little longer, but it's actually made of pieces even smaller than that. So if you lose your way, it won't matter. And it's anyway an excerpt from a longer work. I call these vectors, aphorisms, and 10-second essays. I've committed about 1,000 of them so far. And this one is, this is Vectors 5.1, if you need to know. And it has the subtitle, Otherwise, since that's what it's about. Wishing things were otherwise, want things to be otherwise. They don't, in the book, they don't have numbers. It's like this book, For Now, which is probably backwards on your screen. It's called For Now. And it's coming out June 9th. In the book, it doesn't have, the pieces don't have numbers, but I'm going to read them just so you know when I'm done with one. 1. The secret to unhappiness is knowing exactly what you want. 2. Somewhere in the multiverse, the theory goes, some duplicate of me has everything I could imagine wanting. Should that make me happier or sadder? 3. Dreams hurt each other. 4. Though it's not what I ordered, I don't say anything. Maybe it won't be great, but it won't be disappointing in quite the same way what I chose could have been. 5. I like having choices a lot better than using them. 6. I'm going to start calling it predicting the past, since so much of what I want to know about the future is how I'll feel then about what I'm deciding to do now. 7. So often it would have been better to doubt my confidence, but I would have needed more confidence in my doubt. 8. Silly to worry about freedom of the will, since most of me arrives from beyond its reach. Weather, history, accident, you. 9. What's called creativity is an accident we learn to keep having. 10. Luck whispers, you deserved me. 11. Let's be fair about the limits of language. Often enough, what it says is actually better than what we were thinking, though maybe not as good as what we thought we were thinking. 12. I tripped so badly, I danced. 13. How embarrassing to be a god, stripped of all your excuses. Everyone would know that everything you were, everything that happened to you, everything that came out of your mouth was exactly what you had wished. 14. The Unbeliever's Prayer. Help me so subtly I don't notice. Be the luck I can take credit for. 15. Mountains are always moving. It's less a matter of faith than of patience. 16. Maybe I'm not lost, just a little too certain I should be somewhere else. 17. The road not taken also would have gotten me home. 18. This is the last one. It always makes sense to say, you're alive. What else do you want? But only to yourself. This is also a shortish poem, 10 lines or so. It's called Momentum. The scientific factoid is true, by the way, although the depiction of momentum at the end is a little fanciful. Momentum. At our temperate latitude, the Earth is spinning at 800 miles per hour. It's smooth, no roaring in the wind. We move, we speak easily. But every once in a while, two who were walking side by side spin out, shattering in smoke like jets whose wingtips touch. And now and then, seemingly randomly, someone falls and does not get up and recedes with terrible velocity. This is a long poem, which in the 21st century is something that goes off the first page. But it's the longest thing I'll read for sure. And I'm only going to read one more thing. I wasn't sure whether to title it For the Children or For the Aliens, which should tell you something about it. It's a little bit about children as aliens. I was thinking about my children, my many years of students, really about everyone younger than I am, which these days is like nearly everyone. So it ended up being called For the Children. They were unutterably lovely, the aliens, when finally we knew them, when at last we understood they had lived and moved among us from the beginning in bodies the image of ours, though smoother, eyes wider, as if the world were a little darker for them or more wondrous. And we loved them as wildly and deeply and helplessly as our first loves, our dreams, our lost ones all at once, though we knew they were wilder and deeper than we were and freer, and loving them only deepened our loneliness. When they gathered on evening corners faintly luminous, and their murmuring rose in urgency, calling on stars, we feared they would leave us for worlds far, far beyond us, though we dared not ask, in their language so eerily ours, will you carry us with you, lest they look away, bored, with our dullness, our burdensome love, our ignorant dying? What could we, after all, with our dim minds, our narrowed sensoria, know of the lightning of their thoughts, the storm of their joys, or their sorrows, for sorrow was theirs. They were lords of sorrow. Why in the world these creatures, immortal and perfect, should be so gloomy and aimless was beyond us. Yet they grew so slowly into the unprecedented lives we had thought they would seize instantly as their right, that it seemed the long, long future brooding over them was so heavy they could hardly bear it forward one little step. And at last they dismissed their fantastic travels, faster than light, that had landed them only here, and their magic technologies that had taught them, it seemed, what anyone could have told them. And they ceased to gather on corners dreaming of rescuers, and glanced, if at all, only sidelong at the stars. Maybe some earthly pathogen had worn them, or the weakness of our yellow sun had left them so wan that even their radiant children could not tell them from us when they sat with us, sipping at coffee a little more patiently now, enduring our sadness, our sad adoration, even our sad relief that life was a little less possible than once we had hoped. Since who else in this vast, small universe still knew that they were as luminous and unutterably lovely as our first loves, our dreams, our lost ones, all at once? So impossible, they were beautiful. So beautiful, they were true. I'll finish up with another short poem. I hold the record for teaching Shakespeare's sonnet 73, 1,482 times by actual count. It's the one that starts that time of year thou mayst in me behold, and talks about the phases of life. And the title of the poem is the sonnet's second line. When yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang. If life is a year, then this is November, just about the day I'm thinking it'll never get cold, and it gets cold. If life is a day, then now is the darkening, serious, but not quite deep enough to sleep in. If life is an hour, then I'm near the end of a story I might or might not finish in an hour. But life is a minute, and suddenly, looking up from the page, who can tell whether it's the middle or end or beginning of a minute? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Jim. And thank all of you who are out there in our virtual living room for joining us tonight. I hope to see you again next Friday night when we hear from Emily August, Cynthia Aru King, and Jacob Camacho. Thank you for coming. Join us this week for our write-ins. Look at our writing prompts during the day. And we hope that we can serve you in this way. And on the way out, look for the chat box and with the Pass the Hat tab in the chat box, chat window. And if you can support us, we appreciate that. So thank you. Be safe. Don't get too much sunshine. I don't think it's good for you.